My introduction to film and video and the importance of it that would later play into my life came during my senior year at Occidental College. In March of 1968, the high school walkouts occurred. And this was about 4,000 students from the four major high schools in East Los Angeles walked out to protest the inferior education that they were receiving. And I became immediately involved because my sister was one of the walkout participants from Wilson High School. And I started attending community meetings. And for the first time in my life, I think, I began to see Mexican Americans who were articulate, who were smart, and who were championing human justice. And this completely turned me around, and I began to realize that this was really what I needed to be doing with my life. And so within a very short time, I got involved. I started the Occidental College of Mexican American Students organization. We did food drives to Delano to help the farm workers. And it was during this time that I was graduating. And when I graduated, I applied to 5 graduate schools and were turned down by all of 5 of them. So here I was, recently graduated, recently married, no money, no job, and I'm at an East LA community meeting dance, and I bump into this guy, knock him on the floor, in the dance floor, I help pick him up, and he introduces himself as Frank Cifuentes, and he tells me that he's an advisor for a soon-to-be started film school for minority students. And at that time, there were a number of producers in Hollywood who had realized that there were virtually no African Americans or Latinos or Asians involved in Hollywood filmmaking. And so they petitioned the US government, and they got a grant to create a school which they called New Communicators. And New Communicators was accepting bids for students, applications. I applied and I got accepted, and that was my introduction to a little Super 8 camera. And it was with that Super 8 camera that all during the summer of 1968 and on into 1969 that I began to document a lot of the key events that were going on in the Chicano civil rights movement here in Los Angeles. There was, for example, walkouts, I'd be filming them, picket lines, I'd be filming them. I participated in a 7-day sit-in at the Los Angeles School Board from within, filming from within. And all of this, began to work on me, and I began to see the importance of how media could be utilized to better the community. And that was, I think, basically when I made my commitment that this is what I wanted to be doing with my life. About this time, KCET was starting up for the very first talk show, Mexican American Affairs talk show. And they were going to open up a satellite studio in East Los Angeles. They had gotten a grant from the Ford Foundation, and they basically took over an old bank, and the vault became the control booth. And they created this studio in East Los Angeles. And they had heard about this crazy kid in East LA with a Super 8 camera, and so I interviewed, and I was hired on. And I came on, I think, first as a PA, but within the first month of planning, I quickly became associate producer, and I wound up writing more than 3/4 of the scripts for the show, and I was a co-host. And so it was really baptism by fire, and that's really how I learned a lot about television production, was just on-the-job training. The Ahora show, it was called Ahora, which means now. We produced 175 live half-hour shows, and so I learned in the live format what it meant to do TV, and it was really pretty exhilarating, pretty exciting, because every night at 7 o'clock, whether we were ready or not, we went on the air. And we did all manner of programming. We did cultural affairs, we had musicians, we had theater, we had art. I wrote a whole series on Chicano history. We covered all the events that were going on in the community at the time. We interviewed all the walkout leaders, the Brown Berets, all the different civic groups that were involved in East Los Angeles. And that was really my introduction to television. But in terms of identity, of social identity, of Chicanos as a people, nothing had ever been done. And so I felt that what we needed was a document that would give us a face, that would say, a countenance, who are we? And so I produced this, I wrote a proposal to the Ford Foundation through KCT, and we got funded, and I produced this 1-hour film. And I structured it in parallel structure so that I began with the events that were going on in the 70s, in the 1969, 70, 71, related to the Chicano Civil Rights Movement. But I intercut it with a historical overview of who the Chicano was. And we began with the Aztecs and moved all the way forward. And so at the end, not only did you get a perspective of the different struggles that were afoot at the time, the political struggle, the farm workers' struggle, the education struggle, but also you got a sense of how this was a culmination of 500 years of Mexican-American history. And that film was screened nationally, was broadcast nationally. There was a group called Fairness, Accuracy in Media that tried to have it banned from broadcast on PBS. They filed a lawsuit with PBS. KCT's attorneys fought it, and we were able to broadcast the film anyway. But it just gives you a sense of the controversy that just doing a film about Mexican Americans in those days was a big deal. And to this day, I'm proud to say that to this day it's still being used in universities and colleges 40 years later. My early years were raised in East Los Angeles. It was a community that was very poor. We didn't have too much exposure to art per se. We had my stepfather, who raised me, worked as at the concession stand of the Floral Drive-In. And so my early recollections of cinema were he would borrow a neighbor's car, and we would drive to the Floral Drive-In, and he would go work, and I would sit in the car and watch the movies. And so my very early recollections, I must have been like maybe 6, 7 years old, was watching, you know, The Mummy and The Werewolf and all these early 50s science fiction and horror movies there in the car. And my dad would, when he had his lunch break, he'd come and he'd sit with me and we'd lunch together, and then, you know, at 3 or 4 in the morning, by then I'd fallen asleep, he'd bring me home. So this is my very first recollections of cinema per se.